When we look back at human history, few events have shaped our world as deeply as World War II. This war touched every corner of the globe and changed everything we knew about warfare, human nature, and the world order. Between 1939 and 1945, more than 70 million people lost their lives. Let me take you through this dark chapter of our past. The story begins in the aftermath of World War I. Germany had been defeated and forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. This treaty was harsh. Germany lost territory, had to pay huge amounts of money to the winners, and was forced to accept full blame for the war. The German people felt humiliated and angry. Their economy collapsed, and millions lost their jobs. In times like these, people look for someone to blame and someone to lead them out of darkness. Enter Adolf Hitler. He promised to restore Germany's pride and make the country great again. Hitler and his Nazi party came to power in 1933, and he quickly became a dictator. He blamed Jewish people and other minorities for Germany's problems. He began rebuilding Germany's military, even though the Treaty of Versailles said he couldn't. The world watched nervously, but nobody wanted another war, so they hoped Hitler would stop. He didn't stop. In 1938, Germany took over Austria. Then Hitler demanded part of Czechoslovakia. Britain and France gave it to him, hoping this would satisfy his hunger for land. We call this appeasement today, and history has taught us it was a terrible mistake. On September 1st, 1939, German forces invaded Poland. This time, Britain and France had promised to protect Poland, so they declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. The German military used a new strategy called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. They combined fast-moving tanks, planes, and soldiers to overwhelm their enemies quickly. Poland fell in just weeks. Then, in the spring of 1940, Germany turned west. Denmark and Norway fell. Then came the big shock. France, one of the most powerful countries in Europe, surrendered in just 6 weeks. Britain now stood alone against Nazi Germany. Hitler ordered his air force to bomb British cities day and night. We call this the Battle of Britain. The British people showed incredible courage. They hid in subway stations during bombing raids, rebuilt their homes, and refused to surrender. Prime Minister Winston Churchill rallied his people with famous speeches about never giving up. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Japan had been building its own empire. Japan wanted control of Asia and the Pacific. They had already invaded China in 1937, committing terrible atrocities like the Nanjing Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians were killed. In June 1941, Hitler made a huge mistake. He broke his peace agreement with the Soviet Union and invaded. The German military pushed deep into Soviet territory, surrounding the city of Leningrad and marching toward Moscow. But Hitler underestimated the Russian winter and the determination of the Soviet people. The siege of Leningrad alone lasted 872 days and killed over 1 million people. Then came December 7, 1941, a date that changed everything for America. Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. More than 2,400 Americans died that morning. The United States, which had tried to stay out of the war, was now fully committed. President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy. What followed was total war on a scale never seen before. Every aspect of society was devoted to the war effort. Factories that once made cars now made tanks. Women took jobs in factories and served as nurses near the battlefront. Food was rationed. Children collected scrap metal. Entire nations mobilized for survival. The battles were brutal. In the Pacific, American and Japanese forces fought island by island across thousands of miles of ocean. Places like Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa became names written in blood. The fighting was savage, with neither side giving quarter. In North Africa, British and German forces battled in the desert. In the Atlantic Ocean, German submarines hunted Allied ships carrying supplies. In the skies over Germany, Allied bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives on German cities. And on the Eastern Front, the Germans and Soviets fought the largest and deadliest battles in human history. The Battle of Stalingrad lasted from August 1942 to February 1943. It was fought house by house, room by room, sometimes with soldiers grappling hand to hand in the rubble. When it ended, the German army had lost, and over 1 million people were dead. This battle marked the turning point on the Eastern Front. While the war raged, something even more sinister was happening. Hitler and the Nazis implemented what they called the final solution, the systematic murder of 6 million Jewish people. We call this the Holocaust, and it remains one of the darkest crimes in human history. Jews were rounded up from across Europe and sent to concentration camps. Places like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Dachau became factories of death. People were worked to death as slaves, shot in mass graves, or murdered in gas chambers. The Nazis also killed millions of others they considered undesirable: Roma people, disabled people, homosexuals, political opponents, and Slavs. When Allied soldiers finally liberated these camps in 1945, they found scenes that haunted them for the rest of their lives. Piles of emaciated bodies, survivors who were barely alive, evidence of medical experiments and systematic cruelty. The world was shocked, and we promised ourselves never again. By 1943, the Allies were pushing back. In the Pacific, American forces were hopping from island to island, moving closer to Japan. In North Africa, the Germans and Italians had been defeated. The Allies then invaded Italy, and Mussolini, the Italian dictator, was overthrown. The biggest operation came on June 6, 1944, D-Day. Allied forces launched the largest amphibious invasion in history on the beaches of Normandy and France. Despite heavy casualties, they established a foothold. Paris was liberated in August. The Allies were now pushing toward Germany from the west, while the Soviets advanced from the east. Germany was being squeezed from both sides, but Hitler refused to surrender. He ordered everyone to fight to the death. German cities were bombed to rubble. Millions more died in the final year of the war. In April 1945, Soviet forces surrounded Berlin. Hitler, hiding in a bunker under the city, realized the end had come. On April 30th, he committed suicide. On May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. After nearly 6 years, the war in Europe was over. People danced in the streets of London, Paris, and New York. But the celebration was mixed with grief. Europe was in ruins. Entire cities had been destroyed. Millions were homeless. And we were only beginning to understand the full horror of what had happened in the concentration camps. Japan, however, fought on. American forces had captured islands close to Japan, but an invasion would cost hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides. President Harry Truman faced a terrible decision. The United States had developed a new weapon, the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, an American plane dropped this bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The explosion was like nothing ever seen before. It destroyed the entire city in seconds and killed about 80,000 people immediately. Tens of thousands more died later from radiation. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb fell on Nagasaki. On August 15th, Japan surrendered. World War II was finally over. The numbers are almost too large to understand. About 70 to 85 million people died, roughly 3% of the world's population. The Soviet Union alone lost 27 million people. Poland lost 17% of its population. China lost 20 million. Germany lost 7 million. Japan lost 3 million. The United States lost 420,000. Britain lost 450,000. But these are just numbers. Behind each one was a person with a name, a family, dreams, and hopes. Entire generations were wiped out. Cities were reduced to rubble. Ancient treasures were destroyed. And the psychological scars would last for decades. World War II changed our world forever. It ended the age of European empires and gave rise to two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, whose rivalry would shape the next 45 years. It led to the creation of the United Nations, as nations tried to build a system that would prevent such a catastrophe from happening again. The war showed us both the worst and the best of humanity. We saw systematic evil in the Holocaust and war crimes committed by all sides. We saw entire populations bombed and cities destroyed. But we also saw courage, sacrifice, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things to help others. Today, when I think about World War II, I remember that freedom is never free. Democracy is fragile. We must always stand against tyranny, prejudice, and hatred before they grow too powerful. The veterans of that war are nearly all gone now, but their sacrifice and the lessons of their struggle must never be forgotten. This war reminds us that peace is precious and worth fighting for. It shows us that when evil rises, good people must stand together to oppose it, and it teaches us that the choices we make today shape the world tomorrow. That's why we study history, not to dwell in the past, but to build a better future.